get into the presentation here. So this, I don't know if y'all, it may be tough for you in the back to quite see this, but that red square sort of defines the area that we've analyzed for the demographics. And it covers from just inside the Beltway, so pretty close to where we are now, to out towards, actually going into Waller County and out towards the Brazos River. 1,000 square miles, about 1.5 million residents as of the 2010 census. That's gone up since then. And a bit over 500,000 households and nearly 500,000 jobs as of that time. 3 major employment centers, the Energy Corridor, West Chase, and the Memorial City area. That's also, of course, been expanding since the 2010 census as well. There's those activity centers in relation to that big red square. And so we've, since last year, we have updated our numbers a little bit. You know, we prepare for some other work that we do, we prepare a regional forecast, a long-range regional forecast of population, jobs, and households. And so, you know, the economic conditions and assumptions that we were working under as of early 2015 have changed a little bit. You know, we're sort of having a near-term slowdown. And so we have made some adjustments and factored that into our new estimates. And here we're showing that by 2020 we're expecting about 1.85 million people in that big red square to be living in that big red square. And then by 2050, well, by 2040 we're at 2.5 million people, and then getting up close to 3 million people just in that red square by 2050. And keep in mind that, you know, Houston Metro as a whole right now is around 6.3 million.
It's closing in on 6.5.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a lot of growth even in comparison to how big we are now. And a major component of that growth, or a major characteristic of that growth, has been increasing ethnic diversity. So you know, this part of the metropolitan area had historically been pretty much white, non-Hispanic, and that's been changing quite rapidly. And so it's really, the diversity of the area has been increasing rapidly in the last 20 years, and we expect that to continue. You can see that as of 2000, the area was just over half the population was white, non-Hispanic. By 2010, that had decreased to about 40%, and as of our current estimates for this year, we think it's down to 36.5%. So the white non-Hispanic share decreasing substantially. The biggest component of the increase of the change in the demographic composition has been the Hispanic population, from 22% in 2000 to 31% as of 2010, and about a third, 32.6%, as of this year is our current estimate. And you can see the Black non-Hispanic and Asian non-Hispanic populations maintaining, you know, substantial shares of the remainder consistently. So you know, you get that 2016 figure, and it's like everybody's getting to be sort of, you know, each major ethnic group having a major piece of the overall pie. The diversity index, which is a way to sort of measure how diverse is the population in terms of the major ethnic categories, you can see it's been rising, and from 64.5% in 2000, and as of 2014, our last time that index was estimated about 72%.
One note on the, oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So how does that compare with the country as a whole?
Houston is, I haven't seen the latest data on the country as a whole, but Houston is generally considered to be significantly more diverse than the country as a whole. And you know, we're one of the leading edges of the diversification of the overall U.S. population. Because you do have while you do have major states such as California, New York, Florida, that are similarly diverse as to Texas or to the Houston metropolitan area, you also have large areas, you know, of the West and the Midwest and parts of the South that don't have, particularly the Hispanic population not being such a major component of their population yet. That's changing though. I mean, the Hispanic population is growing everywhere in America, as is the Asian population. So, you know, at some point the overall composition of the nation will end up being, you know, I'm not sure how many decades it's going to take, but there will be sort of a majority-minority sort of profile at that point, where, you know, the Anglo or white non-Hispanic population is less than half of the total.
Which nationwide now, I believe it's a little under 2/3 from the latest estimates.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a quick question. This isn't necessarily ethnicity related, but do you track, and is there any reason to track international population, like non-resident citizens, or?
There is data available on that. We haven't compiled that specifically. The census asks, you know, were you born in this country or not? So you can certainly find out about what share of the population has been foreign born. And then, of course, the number of, you know, there's, I'm not sure how easily available it is. It's not something we've pulled, but the number of people on some sort of visa or, you know, that type of thing, you know, I'm sure that data exists. I just don't know how available it is from the government, you know, as to where people actually live. So, but from the census can give you some indication, at least on the foreign born.
Yes,
Yes.
question on the previous slide,
Mhm.
not necessarily dealing with the diversity, but kind of sort, and that is, have you guys gathered or collected any data that suggests the impetus for such a change as this?
There's different components to demographic change, you know, in just population growth generally. You know, there's three, there's the major components of demographic change are births over deaths, so people who are already here having children, and if that exceeds the number of people who are dying, then you'll have growth. Then there's people moving in domestically from other parts of within the United States, and then there's people who are moving in from other countries. And Houston has received growth from all three groups. And you know, there's other metropolitan areas in this country that don't get that. And but we're similar to the major, you know, to the Los Angeleses and the New Yorks in that, you know, all three groups are growing. I will say that one reason for the diversification is because historically, especially for newer immigrant households, Hispanic households have tended to be larger. Now their household size, the number of children they typically have does tend to go down with successive generations after they've been in America, but that's part of the reason for why the Hispanic population has been growing so much, is that they've tended to have more kids than the white population has. So that's kind of gives you some idea, you know, between all three of those major growth factors. Here we've got some maps that are intended to show sort of on a census block group or block?
This is block group.
Block groups, which is, if you're not familiar with the census, there are census tracts, there are census block groups, and then there's blocks, blocks being the smallest level of geography. And this is block groups, so it's one step up from that, combinations of census blocks. And these maps are intended to sort of show how the profile has changed at the block group level. And each major color category represents a major ethnicity category, and the darker the hue of that particular color, the greater the share of that ethnic group within that block group. So you can see that in 2000, you know, that vast swath of the sort of darker red, reddish brown color is meant to show, that shows the white non-Hispanic population. So the darkest kind of brown is where, you know, you had the over 80% population is white non-Hispanic. And the purple is Latino, and the green is Black or African American, and then Asian is blue. Yes?
So Steve, from an orientation standpoint, that midline is I-10, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then to the right is what?
This is I-10 or Katy Freeway.
Right.
This is West Park here, with the tollway. Here, this is the loop right here.
Ah, okay, thank you.
So you're going all the way, this map goes all the way to downtown. There's 290 going out like that. 1960 Highway 6, the Beltway.
So
Here's
what,
Grand Parkway.
so what is the one purple square all the way to the left? What is that?
Oh, here?
Yeah.
Here, you're basically, remember, this is 2000, so
Okay.
we're 16 years ago. And this is basically out towards Brookshire, kind of out where the igloo plant moved to. And so, you know, you had farm laborers basically, or people working in local, you know, industries. It's actually not that uncommon once you're in the southern half of Texas to see, you know, significant Latino population because they have a lot of, you know, migrant labor and things like that. So that area was, you know, still, as of 2000, was still pretty rural. Not so much anymore. You know, it's definitely on the leading edge now of development. But you can see how there's that sort of, the Chronicle, I've called it this, and the Chronicle picked up on the term the arrow, the white population, the white-dominated census block groups coming in from the west side in that band between Westheimer and Katy Freeway, and then coming in inside the loop and including, you know, kind of stretching out towards the Garden Oaks, Oak Forest area and down towards Bel Air, all the way to pretty much getting close to downtown. And then you have Spring Branch, where we are now, heavily Latino dominated for most of it, except a group on the south central part by the freeway. Southwest Houston, look at the diversity there. I mean, just hyper diverse, including some areas that had actually the Asians making up the single largest ethnic group. So, you know, it was already, you know, well on the way to diversification as of that point, but then you look at 2016 and the current estimate, and it's gone even further. Where now you have, you know, significant diversification. A lot of the heaviest dominated white population areas have, the whites may still be a majority or the single largest ethnic group, but not in the share that they used to be. So that really dark brown areas have decreased. You'll notice the spread of more heavily Latino areas, especially that area out north of I-10, west of Highway 6. They are actually, in many of those block groups now, actually the majority, actually constitute a majority of the population. In Southwest Houston, they've actually increased the Latino share in many of those block groups. Down in Fort Bend County, look how Asians actually are the majority ethnic group in some of those block groups now, down towards Sugar Land. Some increasing diversity in that shaft of the arrow, if you will, between Westheimer and I-10 as well. So, you know, that's pretty rapid change in 16 years. You know, and plus, you know, a lot of these census block groups out on the western edge of that map, of course, converted from basically being undeveloped or rural to now being suburban during that time too. So that also factors into it. You had very low population in many of them, and now you have thousands of people living there. So you expect that it's going to be more diverse. How does this area compare? Yes.
For demographic purposes, what's the difference between Hispanic and Latino?
Oh, it's really, sorry, and I don't mean to confuse anyone, it's basically used interchangeably.
Okay.
There's not meant to be any particular distinction. In fact, typically what you'll see, at least in Texas, used is probably more Hispanic, but both terms are used. And I'm sure there's folks who prefer one or the other for various reasons. We have not taken a side on that issue. So how does this area compare to the region overall, the greater Houston region? So you can see this is showing population and specifically indicating this area's share of the region's population. It used to be about a fifth back in 1990 of the total population of the region, and that has increased. You know, this has been one of the major focus areas of growth in the Houston region over the last 20 years. And now it's up to basically a quarter, and we're projecting that it's going to stay roughly in as about a quarter of the total population of the region going out towards 2040, 2050. And so you can see we expect the total region to be up around over 11 million by 2050. So I mean that's, as I said, we're almost 6.5 million right now. So that's, you know, getting close to doubling during that time period. So you think traffic is bad now? Another demographic factor that is worth noting is the age distribution of the region. Houston is known as a young region. There's many areas of the nation that skew considerably older in the overall age profile. Houston's known for having a young population. Here we have the overall region is shown in the dark blue, and Greater West Houston shown in the red. And you can see that for the most part there's not dramatic differences. The main things where you'll see a difference is that a greater share of the population in that West Houston area is in that sort of middle age 35 to 54. A little bit higher share shown in that age range. And of course, that's people that, you know, you think of, well, who moves to these suburban areas? Well, that's people who've been working for several years, they're starting their families, they want to buy that house. And so people who are, you know, in their 30s and 40s and so on, moving into the area. That also shows, you know, slightly higher population of age 10 to 14 and 15 to 17. So, you know, they're trying to put their kids in those schools, etc. And so that just indicates that it's a very sort of family raising type environment. But it's not hugely different from the rest of the region as a whole. Average household size, again, the region in the blue and Greater West Houston in the red, and you know, this being, as I said, sort of a family raising area, you know, we have a slightly higher average household size, kids in the household basically, than the region as a whole, but not dramatically different, and that's not really projected to change dramatically over the coming decades. Education. Now this is a big one where some major differences show up. And one particular feature of Greater West Houston are high education levels compared to the overall region. You can see that the share of folks with a bachelor's degree, how much longer that red bar is for Greater West Houston than for the region as a whole, where over a quarter of the folks in Greater West Houston reached a bachelor's degree, and just under a fifth of the overall region. So we definitely skew higher educated in Greater West Houston. And furthermore, the share of the folks who are relatively uneducated, who didn't finish high school, is lower in Greater West Houston than what you see in the region as a whole, or folks that only finished high school, didn't go on to any post-high school education. So that's very important because that tells you a lot about the labor pool on this side of town, the skills that they have, the income levels that they have, etc. And it's a significant reason for why companies that need educated workforces like to locate on this side of town. And you can see our stat there, almost 44% of the adults in West Houston have a college degree, bachelor's or a graduate degree of some kind, versus, and here we have it displayed on a map, where the darker the shade, this is basically measuring folks who have at least a bachelor's degree. So they got a bachelor's or some sort of graduate degree, or professional degree. And the darker the shade, the greater the share of the adult population that has that. So you can see going all the way out to the Grand Parkway between, West Park and the Katy Freeway, a very highly educated population. This was as of 2000, so the trend was already underway at that point. You have lower educated populations in Spring Branch. Again, you probably have a large, relatively uneducated, at that point, had a large, relatively uneducated immigrant Hispanic population in much of Spring Branch. Also, once you're south of West Park. When you get to 2016, you can see that those trends have kind of continued. The one thing that is somewhat noticeable, just flashing back and forth, is that you actually have a fairly large, less educated population that's moving into that area north of the Katy Freeway, west of Highway 6 to the Grand Parkway. So sort of the northern part of the Katy School District, or the southern part of the Cy-Fair School District. Now, it's really been starting to skew much more. I showed you that also it's been skewing much more Hispanic. So you probably have, a lot of, fairly recent immigrants who are moving to that area.
Will you just do it one more time?
Sure. And you can also see, once you get inside the loop, how much more the whole west half of the inner loop, is really becoming dominated. I mean, we all know that it's gotten a lot more expensive. Well, that's because people with high education levels and probably high salaries, are moving into the western half of the inner loop, and the Heights, for example, has changed quite a bit in the last 15 years. So related to education levels are household income. Again, this is highly correlated, with that education chart that I showed, where you have the sort of 75,000 to and the higher and above, those higher income levels, how much more the greater shares of the population in West Houston sit in those income categories than they do in the lower income categories. Once you're down below 25,000, you're basically talking about poverty levels, and we have lower levels of poverty in West Houston. The median household income, meaning half the households having more and half the households having less than that particular income level in West Houston, is about 70,000, and for the region overall, it's about 62,000. So, all these things that are showing that we skew higher income, again, highly correlated with those education levels. And here we have that depicted. This is just 2016. We have that depicted. It's harder to show. You can't really, when you're talking income categories like that, between a certain, 15,000 to 25,000 or something like that, it's harder to compare over time because of the inflation factor. So you can't really adjust the numbers to fix that. So that's why we're not showing you the 2000 one. But here we have 2016. It shows that, not surprisingly, in the Memorial Villages, Tanglewood, River Oaks, you've got the highest income levels, the darkest shades. And this is median household income by block group. So, those areas, having the highest incomes, but that really extends out all the way through the western part of Memorial, and then into Cinco Ranch, and out in the southern half of Katy ISD. Once you're north of the Katy Freeway, for the most part, it's much more moderate income levels. And the northern part of Spring Branch, the median income's less than $35,000 per household. So, those are very, there's a lot of low-income households in that area. The growth out in Cy-Fair, as well as high-income households in the outer parts of Cy-Fair. And then, a lot more poverty once you're south of Westheimer, and especially once you're south of West Park, on the west side, at least until you get out to Fort Bend County. So, a lot of this, you keep seeing this pattern of that arrow show up from, the western part of South Katy all the way through, and then, now extending, down to Bel Air, and down to Meyerland, and then up through Garden Oaks and Oak Forest. That's really been solidifying, over the last 15 years. So what kinds of employment are the residents of West Houston, what industries are they employed in? So that's what, these are people who live in West Houston. This is not the jobs that are in West Houston. This is what industries the people who live in West Houston are employed in. You can see there is the mining and oil and gas sector, actually you think, oh my gosh, how could it be so small? This is Houston, we're in an oil and gas town. It's just that the actual industries that are classified as an oil and gas industry is a limited share of the total employment. Whereas, things like engineering firms that may do all their work in oil and gas are classified as professional, scientific, and management services. So that's why, you sort of have to, adjust your expectations a little bit to just because of the way that the businesses are defined. But you can see that Greater West Houston, again in the red, has a slightly higher share of residents employed by firms that are in the mining oil and gas business, as well as a higher share of folks in that professional, scientific, and management services. They have a lower share of residents in construction industry, in medical, education, and other services. And let's see, also a higher share in retail trade, interestingly enough. So, we skew more white collar, basically, in Greater West Houston as far as what kinds of jobs the residents have than blue collar, as you might see in the rest of Houston. Yes, ma'am?
If we looked at this in the early 80s, mid 80s, would that oil and gas take up a larger percentage? Do you know?
I'm not quite sure. Again, it's just because of the way those businesses are classified.
Okay.
And
that was the industry, and so much effort's been placed to diversify the city itself. So. Right.
I mean, it's likely that they say that oil and gas was a much bigger share of the overall economy in terms of the total amount of local gross domestic product that was produced back then. Whether the actual employment, how much the actual employment changed in terms of those classifications, I'm not sure. It's quite possible, though, that yes, you would have seen, a greater share, a higher share, percent share in the mining, oil, and gas sector at that point. But there's other things like manufacturing, for example. Houston's long been a major manufacturing city, and we still are. We're still one of the major manufacturing centers of America, but the total number of people employed in manufacturing has dropped because of automation. Right, you just need a lot fewer people to run all that stuff now.
Is petrochemical included in manufacturing?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, that's a good question.
Yes. Although, for example, the Exxon refinery, because it's owned by Exxon, would be, that's an oil and gas company. But like BASF or another petrochemical facility like that, that's classified as a manufacturing employer. Just some other notes on households and housing. Nearly 3/4 of total, as of this year, our estimate is that nearly 3/4 of households are family households. That means that you have a household of at least 2 people who are closely related to each other. So that could be husband and wife, it could be husband, wife, and kids, it could be parent and child, etc. That's a family household. And that's slightly higher than the metro area overall. 40.7% of families are married couples with children, and that is, somewhat higher than the Houston region overall. But again, as I said, that correlates with what I showed you earlier, sort of, the profile of this is a family-raising area. Housing vacancy is a little bit lower than the region overall. That's partly because while there's, vacancy, there's a lot of things that go into vacancy. We think of if you think of vacancy as just, that's abandoned houses or something, that's definitely only a small part of vacancy. It includes things like, the vacancy in apartment units. It includes new homes that have been built that haven't been moved into yet. So there's different components of vacancy. And we have a slightly lower vacancy rate than the region overall. Granted, we know that there's a lot of layoffs and things that are happening, on this side of town right now. and there's been a lot of new supply, like especially in multifamily, but also new single-family homes. But the market actually on this side of town was very, very tight during the last several years. So you really had quite low vacancy because, you know, that's why housing prices and rents kept going up so fast, was because there wasn't enough supply to accommodate all the people that wanted to live here because they were working on this side of town. Median home value, $185,000, that's higher than the region overall. You know, obviously that sample is going to be affected by the fact that what Greater West Houston, the map we showed you, includes things like memorial villages and things like that where you have really high housing values. And median year built, 1996 compared to 1989, so we skewed newer housing stock. And is that it, Ty?
No, it should be.
Well, and Steve, we're about at our time. Can we save some time for questions?
Yes.
Some last questions?
On your last graph, you had families versus married couples with children. What's the difference? No.
Families, well, married couples, married couples with children is a subset of family households.
So I don't understand what family means.
Family is a household that has at least two people who are closely related to each other.
Okay.
So a husband and wife with no kids is a family household.
Roommates would not be a family household.
Right.
They would be separate.
Right. Okay.
But, you know, a single parent child is a family household, or a parent and a grandparent
Right.
is a family household.
Okay.
So, yeah, married couples with children are a subset of that. Again, this is just showing that we do expect, despite the current conditions, we do expect employment to increase. We've adjusted this downward a little bit for the near term. This is jobs in Greater West Houston, again, skewing a little bit more towards those white-collar jobs. Especially notice professional, scientific, and management services. Engineering firms fit in that category. And this is where engineers live. So you can see big concentrations on the general west side of town, as well as down in Clear Lake. You know, NASA's been down there and so on. So a lot of engineers live down, and inside the loop. I mean, look, that's really filled in with a lot of engineers in the last 15 years. All right. So any more questions?
Great. How about a round? Oh, wait, Jeffrey, what last one?
Information be made available. There's some slides in that.
Yep. Well, you already have it. Yes.
Okay. So Rusty has already. We'll put it in Dropbox for you.
Thank you.
I have one question.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
That's just of Charlie Savino and Charlie, a former guy who used to work there.
Yes.
The demographic center of Houston, where is it?
Oh.
We have not calculated that, and there's a general sense that it has moved west. Some people say it's near Loop 610 and the Katy Freeway. Other people claim it's city center, which, you know, it does skew on the west side of town. I mean, which makes sense because, you know, you can't go a lot of the area on the east side of town. You can't really build in much because it's water or swamp, right, or floodplain. So where's the growth going to happen? It's going to be, you know, more generally on the west side of Houston.
I was telling Charlie said, what, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when he did this
probably
presentation,
4. Yeah.
that it was somewhere along I-10, kind of up toward the heights. It wasn't out here like everybody says it is.
I think people have to remember that, yes, as much growth as we've had out here that has, you know, caused that center to drift a little west, there's a ton of growth going on in Montgomery County, in Brazoria County, even out northeast, Kingwood, out towards Lake Houston, and there's even growth right now out in Baytown, Mont Bellevue. So it's, you know, as much as we notice the growth here, it is happening all throughout the entire region.
And if you want to judge it by traffic, think about which intersections you dread the most. They're still on 610.
Yeah.
Great.
Exactly. I-10, 610, 59, 610. Yeah.
Please join me in a round of applause.